The Supreme Court appears poised to put an end to affirmative action, the precedent that allows colleges to consider a student's race in admissions, and something universities say is essential to assuring diversity on campus. Today, the High Court heard more than 5 hours of arguments in 2 cases, one challenging the University of North Carolina's practices and another similar case involving Harvard. To perhaps no one's surprise, the court's 6 conservative justices expressed deep skepticism of the program. Justice Clarence Thomas, who benefited from affirmative action to be admitted to Yale Law School, but then repudiated the practice that helped pave the way for him to literally be on the court and never stop complaining about how he felt diminished by it, asked affirmative action defenders a seemingly absurd question, particularly coming from him. He asked how diversity benefits education.
I didn't go to racially diverse schools, but there were educational benefits. And I'd like you to tell me expressly, when a parent sends a kid to college, that they don't necessarily send them there to have fun or feel good or anything like that. They send them there to learn physics or chemistry or whatever they're studying. So tell me what the educational benefits are.
Meanwhile, in the minority, the 3 liberal justices defended affirmative action. So Justice Sonia Sotomayor used statistics from states that have already barred the policy.
What we know, we have 9 states who have tried it, and in each of them, as I mentioned earlier, white admissions have either remained the same or increased, and clearly, in some institutions, the numbers for underrepresented groups has fallen dramatically, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Joining me now is Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News Washington correspondent and moderator of Washington Week on PBS, and Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation. Is that about how the arguments went on the right, Yamiche? Clarence Thomas saying, I didn't see any benefit to having diversity.
That is basically how these arguments went. At one point, Justice Thomas asked, well, what exactly is diversity? Explain it to me. And then other justices asked questions like, well, why should race at all be something that even a student should check their box, even if they want to voluntarily give it to you? Why should that matter at all? But then you also heard from liberal justices like Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who only heard the first part of this, which is the part on UNC, because she recused herself, saying that she didn't want to be part of the Harvard dispute, because she used to be part of the structure of the university there, the leadership there, which of course is notable given the fact that so many people have not recused themselves in other aspects of this court. But I will digress on that. What I will say is this. Ketanji Brown Jackson brought up a really important point, which is why should legacy, meaning your grandparents and your parents who went to the schools, maybe like UNC and Harvard, why should that matter more than if someone is saying, well, my grandparents were enslaved, and as a result, I want to get into the school to honor their memory? There was a real contentious back and forth on that. But this was, in some ways, one of the biggest days at the Supreme Court, because we could see the end of affirmative action as we know it, Joy.
I mean, we likely will. I have the Ketanji sound, just as Yamiche just mentioned. Let's listen.
As I understand your no race conscious admissions rule, these 2 applicants would have a dramatically different opportunity to tell their family stories and to have them count. The first applicant would be able to have his family background considered and valued by the institution as a part of its consideration of whether or not to admit him, while the second one wouldn't be able to, because his story is in many ways bound up with his race and with the race of his ancestors.
I had to play that so that Clarence, so that Thurgood Marshall wouldn't haunt me. I needed to balance out the sound I played earlier from someone else. Elie, answer that question. I mean, how can a university turn around and say, I can consider that 3 generations of your family came here and that can be a factor, but I can't consider your background and who you are?
Yeah, they can, because the 6 justices, conservative justices on the Supreme Court, will let them do it, because they don't actually think the diversity is important. See, the other part of this Clarence Thomas ridiculousness that you played is that he got an answer to his question. He got 3 answers to his question. One, Ryan Park, the Solicitor General of North Carolina, said the diversity is important because students learn better in diverse environment, and there are studies showing that. Thomas dismissed that. The second from Elizabeth Freelogger, saying that that our colleges and universities are pipelines into every institution of the country, and she was specifically talking about the service academies and how if you want a diverse officer corps, because it shows that leadership is more legitimate if the officer corps looks like the rest of the nation and enlisted men, that is an important reason for diversity. Thomas dismissed that. And then the lawyer for Harvard University said that there have been many studies that show that groups of investors are better at making investments when they are making those investments in a diverse environment. I love that argument because you can literally prove it with money. And again, Thomas dismissed that. So it's not like they actually disagreed with the arguments in favor of affirmative action. They simply pretended the arguments didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that is a consistent thing we've seen from the Supreme Court. They ignore the actual facts on the ground in order to support their ridiculous narratives.
Yeah, including the fact that affirmative action benefits white women more than it does black people. I want to stay with you for a second, Ellie, because what's being used here are Asian Americans to try to pit Asian American college admittees against black college attendees. You've tweeted a lot about this and the disingenuousness. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so the Asian American argument has been co-opted by these right-wing people who have wanted for their entire careers to see affirmative action taken down. And you saw that because over 5 hours of Supreme Court argument, they never made the one-to-one connection for how affirmative action leads to discrimination against Asian Americans. In the North Carolina case, literally Ryan Park, the Solicitor General, said that you can't make that argument because North Carolina admits a higher percentage of Asian American students than black students. It would be peculiar, he had said, to use that as an evidence for discrimination. In the Harvard case, it's a little bit different. I think there actually are legitimate ways where you can argue that Asian Americans have been discriminated against by Harvard University because they use a particular statistic called personal rating, which disadvantages Asian Americans. But here's the thing. They never said how Harvard's use of that statistic actually has anything to do with affirmative action. And in fact, if they win, the thing that you won't be able to look at is people's race upon admission, but you will be able to still look at the racist statistic that is actually harming Asian Americans. So that's the thing. When you let right-wing people co-opt your argument, you lose. You lie down with the dogs, you wake up with the fleas, and that's what happened to legitimate AAPI concerns throughout this oral argument.
And watch them have Clarence write the decision. Because they don't really think diversity matters, except when they need somebody like Clarence to write a decision like this. Watch them have him do it. Yamiche Alcindor and Elie Mystal, thank you both very much.